imagination. So we're going to try and see what that imagination is like. What is how and do we all have it automatically, or is it something that can be cultivated? What does it mean to have a sociological imagination? But first, let's talk a little bit about what is sociology. And there has been a lot of discussion on whether what we consider to be the social sciences like sociology, economics, political science, history, are these sciences, right? Now, um, you have to understand that sociology as a discipline came up at a particular point in society where, and this is Western European society, where the sciences were, of course, already all well established disciplines. So in a sense, if the discipline had to make a mark, if the discipline had to professionalize in a particular way, it had to respond to the disciplines that were already established. So it had to connect with, in some way, connect with the science, with the sciences. So to establish the discipline, therefore, uh, there was a need to articulate it in terms of a scientific study, right? So sociology is considered to be this kind of a science of society. It's a scientific study of society, and we will move on to looking at what this scientific study means. And you will see as we go along that you will be able to identify that there are some similarities to the way in which we think of science. When we do sociology, there are some similarities, but also there are vast differences. The major sort of reason for this vast difference is that you're not studying in that sense you're studying human beings, yeah. So your focus is on sort of very unpredictable human beings, in the way that they're connected to each other, in the way that they will react, in the way that they will conduct themselves. So um, so to think then in terms of very clear patterns, or to think in terms of very clear causal connections, as you would do in the natural sciences, becomes difficult. But what we want to do in sociology is to be able to look at society, is to be able to look at what we would consider social relationships. So, society is often defined very broadly as a web of social relationships, and that is putting it very simply, because as you go deeper and deeper into the study of the discipline, you will find that people are now questioning the very idea of the social, and saying that, okay, we've taken it too much for granted, this notion of what is social. We don't question it enough. So, but having said that, as sociologists, I think what we are trying to do is to focus on social relationships, to focus on the relationship between the individual and the collective, and to focus on the relationship between um, structure and agency. Now, let's think a little bit about these different aspects. The first thing I said was focus on social relationships. The second is the focus on the relationship between individual and collective. And the third, the relationship between agency and structure. So when I think about agency and structure, um, you know, in what ways are our lives totally determined and shaped by what we think and do, and in what ways is it related to certain structural aspects, certain things that are possibly beyond our control, right? And you can think about this in the context of anything concerning your life. For instance, the decision to study at IIT? What made you choose it? Some of it, and I'm sure there will be a variety of reasons why you chose IIT or why you came to IIT to study, but you will see that there are aspects which connect to individual choice, individual agency, that okay, I decided and I did this, and there are aspects of it which will be connected to other things, for instance to family desires, for instance to what is considered um, a good place to study, and so on, right? So this broadly, this is the subject matter of sociology, the relationship between individual and the collective, the relationship between and that collective is different in different contexts. So in a certain context, when I think about, for instance, when I think about decisions to marry, um, when we think of the collective, it could be the family, it could be the wider kinship network, it could be caste. So and when you think about the decision to study in a particular institution, again, the structure is different. It could be family, it could be the sphere of work, and so on. So broadly, then, the subject matter of sociology, we can say, is in terms of looking at social relationships, in terms of the relationship between individual and collective, and in terms of the relationship between agency and structure. Now, now the way in which we study this is that we try to emulate, as I said, certain principles of scientific discovery and scientific analysis. And as we go along, we will see what are those principles that we try to emulate, and what sorts of results does it give us. And it's when you begin to look at the results that you may say that, well, it's not really a science, right? It's when you begin to think about questions, let's say, of relativism, the fact that we may not be able to, you may do a very sort of organized, systematic study, but yet you may not be able to say something definitive about the relationship between individual, let's say the relationship between individual and collective. So there are these sorts of problems in what we find, in how we are able to articulate what we find, right? But the focus is always to try and find and to try and understand patterns that emerge when we look at these, when we look at the relationship between individual and collective. We want to be able to say something which applies generally, right? So the focus is on trying to make a broad general trying to arrive at a broad and general understanding of these relationships. To what extent we are able to do that is something that is questioned and critiqued, and that is the way in which the discipline also advances. That is the way in which the discipline also grows. So, okay, next slide, please. Yeah. So then, when you think about studying a society, is it different from living in the society? Now, can we all study society? All of us live in society. All of us experience the kinds of things that I'm talking about. Whether it's deciding to go to college, whether it's choosing a particular job, getting married, all of these things will happen in our lives. And does it mean that we are all then capable of studying society? Are we all capable of being sociologists? And here we will have to make the distinction between sociology and common sense. When we live our lives, when we engage in the world, we engage in it with our common sense intact. We use our common sense, and as sociologists, we also have to, we look at that common sense. We we encounter it, because what we are studying is we are studying living human beings, right? Going about the business of making their choices, going about the business of establishing their social relations and so on. So, but when we study it, when we study this, we have to keep us some sort of distance from. We have to make this kind of distinction between common sense and sociology. Um, a sociologist, Andre Bette, has argued that it's important to think of sociology as different from common sense, even though you draw on common sense. That the common sense that people use to live their lives is your data, in a sense, is what you're drawing from. But what we do as sociologists is that uh, um, we use we study society, or we observe society systematically. We try and observe these relations between the individual and the collective in a systematic manner. So what makes sociology distinctive from common sense? First is that it is what is called an empirical science. So it is empirically grounded, which means that you are looking at the facts of daily life and living. You're observing what is going on um, in society, in these social relationships. The way in which you observe these is different from how they would be examined and observed by the ordinary person, right? So there is a certain kind of systematization, a certain discipline which is there in how we observe and record facts when you're doing a sociological study. So my being in the family, right? My engagement in the family is in the manner of common sense, right? It's I don't have to think about it. It's something that I take for granted. The sociologist cannot, when the sociologist studies the family, the sociologist cannot afford to do that. The sociologist has to distance herself from this common sense and begin to observe, record, and ask questions of the very mundane things that are happening in the family, right? So, for instance, if I say that, if you're observing dinner time or meal times in a family, the fact that probably places around the table are reserved. You always have your own place at the table, right? You don't like to change it. So now from you and me, it's taken for granted. I know where I have to sit. I go and sit there. For the sociologist, it's important to record why and how this has come to be the way it is. What is the significance of the head of the table? Which is the head of the table, and who sits there? When is that? Does that rule ever get broken? If it is broken, when and how is it broken? So this is the kind of systematization or questioning that is required um, mm, in order to begin to think sociologically, and to do the systematic science that sociology is. So you observe, in a disciplined manner, you ask questions, and you record in a disciplined manner, and then you do two things. One is you engage in a rigorous search for connections to try and see what is it that is connected to what, right? What are the things that appear connected, or what are the things that people make connections with? And secondly, it is a comparative science. So you do a systematic comparison, which means that when you're studying a particular society, it is not simply to understand that society, but also to understand others. So there is always a process of figuring out similarities and differences, process of looking at what is happening in other societies, uh, um, that is a part of what we do in the discipline of sociology. So systematic comparisons, the systematic use of comparisons is significant. So, you have sociologists sort of trying to look at, let's say, other societies. But when you look at other societies, in order to also understand your own, so the story of other societies is significant or becomes significant for us, also because it helps us to understand what is happening in our own societies. Um, so, so this difference then between common sense and sociology is that common sense does not need to be. It is localized. It is. It does not need to be reflective, right? The point about common sense is that it's not reflective. Whereas when you're doing sociology, precisely you're looking at that common sense, you're drawing from that common sense, but you're reflecting on it. You're questioning it. You're questioning what we call the natural attitude that all of us have towards the world. The natural attitude in terms of um, how we engage in every day in our daily lives, which means that we take certain things for granted. I mentioned in the last class that you take for granted that when there is a timetable, things will happen in a particular way at the institute. You take for granted that when you go out on the road, even though it's crowded, you're not bumping into people, right? Why does that happen, right? So for the sociologists, it's important to ask this question, why, right? Um, so, so this is the difference then between sociology and common sense. Even though sociology draws from common sense, we cannot turn away from common sense. It is fundamental to how and how we do sociology. So, even as we take into account common sense, there has to be a reflective detachment from that common sense in order to be able to frame generalizations, frame certain kind of abstract ideas and theories with which we can understand the social world. I'll stop here for about 5 minutes. If you have any questions, we can take them. And I will reiterate my request to put on your cameras.
What is structure?
Can you be louder?
What is structure?
Okay. What is structure? So when we can when I say that we are looking at the relationship between agency and structure, structure refers to all, I'm referring here to all those aspects that appear to be beyond the control of individual will and desire, right? So what are the forces that are external to the individual that impact the way in which the individual will think, act, and behave, right? So I could mean the institutions, the broad sort of abstract idea of society, that could be a structure. The institutions of your life. So, for instance, it could be family, which is a structure. It could be marriage. It could be the nation, the state, the educational institution, your school, college. All of this provides the structure, the framework within which we as individuals operate. That is the structure. Now, the relationship between agency and structure. Agency meaning, to what extent am I a free, independent a being? And to what extent are my actions the result of this kind of free, independent will? Right? So we are all, yes, there is a certain amount of freedom. We engage with the idea that we are free individuals, but our choices are always constrained by certain structural elements, right? Certain elements that are beyond our control. They appear to either sort of lead us into particular directions, or they appear to constrain us in certain ways. So this sort of give and take that goes on, where we are agents, where we exercise our free will, but we are also determined by the rules of the institutions, which then give this kind of structure to our lives, which give us a scaffold within which we act and behave. Right? Is that clear? Yeah. Thank you for putting your camera on.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, I have a doubt.
Sure. Go ahead.
Ma'am, I have a doubt. So, ma'am, you said that sociologists draw facts and the ideas from the society, but it should be apart from the common sense. So, ma'am, how conclusions, could be derived without the common sense? How, at some point of time, sociologists will drive at the conclusion by observing the society, but the common sense should be something which is kept aside. So that's my question. Like,
Yeah. So I think, yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you, Himanshu. What I was trying to say is that for the sociologist, if I'm studying, let's say lives in a family, or let's take the instance of marriage. How do people marry, right? How do people make the decision to marry? For you and me and others who are in the institution, who are making that kind of choice, there are certain I mean, we are not reflecting on why and where, how, when, and why we are making that choice. We are aware of the rules, we know what the norms are, and we accept the norms. So, for instance, we accept the norm for that. I don't know what, so if I think of American society, why do people marry? You would say people marry when they find their life partners, they fall in love, they find their life partners, and they want to build a life with this person, and they go ahead and get married. If I think of Indian society, a large part of why and how this process happens involves not just the people who are getting married, but the families, right? So we always say that the marriage of two people in India is also a marriage of two families. Now, you see that there is a difference between American society, the way in which American society conceives of marriage, and the way in which we would do it in Indian society. Again, there is a difference temporally. Over time, there has been a difference, right? So if I ask young people today, they're far more likely to say that they would marry out of love, and they would marry the people they choose. Whereas I think, let's say even 15, 20 years ago, that may not have been the case. That, most people would say that we would marry, the person our parents choose for us, and you marry for family, and so on and so forth. So, but the point is that for a sociologist, how does the sociologist has to arrive at these sorts of generalizations about a particular phenomenon, a particular social phenomenon. So if I think of marriage as a social phenomenon, what sorts of generalizations can I arrive at? For me as an individual, when I'm getting married, I've already imbibed much of what is going on. So for instance, when you think that you marry out of choice, right? Do you agree with this idea that you marry out of choice? You choose the person you're going to marry?
yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Now what is that choice based on?
There are certain parameters which I will choose that how will my life partner should be according to, and then I'll just decide.
Yeah. So
Like,
then, so you have your own parameters
yes,
and those parameters will differ. So Kuldeep will have certain parameters, you, Himanshu, will have others, I will have certain others. But so I believe that my parameters are what I have chosen. The sociologist actually will look at 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 different cases and try and arrive at certain general ideas on which these parameters are based. And so if I look at marriage in Indian society, one general principle on which some parameters are based is the principle of caste. Now you may deny it, say that, okay, or it may be class, right? So that we are rarely marrying people outside of our immediate caste class context. We are rarely marrying people outside of our preferred caste, class, religious context, right? So despite the fact that you're saying that, okay, I'm going to choose and I have certain parameters, see, those parameters are not just yours. They belong to a larger community, they belong to a larger group of people. And for the sociologist, you have to, I take from your, what your parameters are, I take that from you. Now that's your common sense, you're building on that. I take that from you, but I also take from 10, and then try and find out, well, the general principle. And I may say that the general principle is that, I could say something like, okay, I think maybe 20 years ago, people, caste was a factor of marriage. Now it is no longer. In fact, what is a consideration is companionship, is similarity of ideas. There is, what I'm doing then is I'm marking a shift in how people have made the decision to marry, right? But I'm also, as a sociologist, focusing on what your ideas are, but reflexively detaching myself simply from that idea to make a general comment. So you may not tell me that class is a parameter. What you will tell me is something else. How do I derive certain categories from what you have told me? So that is the job of the sociologist, to see what those categories driving certain decisions are, to see that relationship between individual will, because what you're going to present is individual will, but I know that that individual will has a certain context. And that's where, when we come to the next part of the lecture, which is looking at what is the sociological imagination, I think that it will become a little bit clearer.
Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am,
I got the idea. Thank you.
Yeah.
excuse me,
Yes.
ma'am. In one of the previous slides, you talked about systematic sciences.
Yeah.
Ma'am, uh, in that context word is used. Sorry, in comparative sciences, could you please elaborate?
Elaborate on comparative.
Yeah, ma'am. But because it is mentioned, sociologists do not end with one particular context. I
Yeah.
mean, could you please give a real life example of how different contexts are observed?
Yeah. So when I said comparative, that in any context, in whatever we are studying, I think the simple example would be uh, to think about. So let's put it this way. So I think that if one looks at Indian sociology, what has happened in India is that the discipline emerged in a context, as you can imagine, after sort of years of colonial rule, right? So this was in the early 50s and 60s when the discipline was being established as a professional discipline mm, in in the country. Now, it was a time when the study of Indian society had been done by Western scholars. So there was a certain kind of perspective which had developed, and the idea to establish the discipline in India would mean that we wanted our own take on Indian society, right? We said that, look, as Indians, we are capable of describing, of arriving at conclusions about the nature of our society. We don't need Western scholars to do that, because when Western scholars come and do that, there is an element of power, there is an element of looking at the Indian society as exotic, and we need to counter that kind of view, right? So what happened with Indian sociology was that a lot of it was Indians studying Indian society, right? Now, what sociologists will argue is that what we need to do, in fact, is whenever we are studying our own society, we need to compare it to others. So a lot of sociology, and if I say, sociology and social anthropology, because that is another kind of relationship, where anthropology was really considered to be the study of primitive society, and sociology, and this is very simply put, but sociology was considered to be the study of modern societies. In India, what we did when we established the discipline was to say that this kind of dichotomy does not really apply, because when we study our own society, we see elements of traditional, the primitive, and elements of the modern, and so you can't make this kind of distinction. So you in India, you had a sort of very unique emergence of the discipline of sociology. So we call it sociology, but what we do is a combination of sociology and social anthropology. But if you just, let's put that aside for a bit. But basically, that when we say comparative science, it's that when you, whatever context you're studying, has to be looked at in relation to others, right? So first is that when I say, so if I say, and I'll continue with the example of marriage, that what can I compare it with? So you see that I began by saying, okay, marriage in American society and marriage in Indian society, right? So I was trying to think then about, okay, it appears to be a stark difference, right? I could, but I could well compare, again, I had also made this point, as you see, that temporarily, over a period of time, what have the shifts been? Again, I'm comparing. I'm saying that, okay, what was it 20 years earlier or 30 years earlier, and what is it now? Yeah? So you can compare across societies. You can think about what the norms are in other societies. What have others written about the same institution elsewhere? You can compare in the particular society across time. And in India, given the kind of diversity, there are, again, local and regional comparisons which are possible. So, if I look at marriage rituals and customs in North India versus South India, you will see that they're vastly different. The kinds of things that you will be able to say about, let's say, the relationship between gender, caste, and marriage in North India and that and in South India, it would again be very, very different. So this is that you're always trying to reflect on the similarities and differences. Now, what's interesting is that as a sociologist, you have your own sort of worldview and your own context. You come to study somebody else's context with that worldview, with that whole understanding. So in any case, willy-nilly, there is a comparison going on. You're always thinking, okay, it's different in my family. It's not like this in my family, right? So the very fact that you're engaging, you have a common sense world, and you're engaging with another common sense world. So often we say that the discovery of another social world is like a culture shock, right? So if I, when I come from a simple example, like if I come from Bengal and I come to a Jat village to study, there are several things, and similarly, a person from a Jat village, a sociologist who's lived all her life in a Jat village, goes to Calcutta to study society there. There is going to be a vast difference. I go to study, if I decide to study Bollywood children, right? The children of Bollywood stars. If that is that is the social world that I want to understand, I realize that, so it'll be a culture shock for me. Lots of things will present themselves as a kind of culture shock. So this experience of a culture shock is in itself comparative. Because why do you have that shock? It's because you're like, oh my God, this doesn't happen where I live. This doesn't happen in my own context, right? So similarly, if I were to really try and understand the worldviews of the street children, again, a culture shock, right? How do children live this way? How is it possible? Because in the context that I live, children are cared for. They're constantly protected from any kind of harm. So it's a completely different world. Okay, so does that answer your question?
Yeah, sure, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So can we? Yeah. So I'm going to share the slide with you, and I want you to watch this video that is mentioned in the slide. It's an interview, and it establishes this relationship between, talks about this relationship between sociology and common sense. Okay, so I think you can move forward from this slide as well. And this one, let's go to, yeah, this is fine. Okay, before I move ahead, Vaibhav, can you just scroll down to a slide which has a picture of C. Wright Mills? Yeah. So, so I want to, we want to discuss this idea of the sociological imagination. And I think in some way I've already introduced it a little bit to say, well, how do we look at common sense? How do we problematize common sense? What is the difference between just living in society and studying society? And that's the kind of focus that the writing that I'm going to now deal with, which is C. Wright Mills's sociological imagination, that's the kind of focus it had. And this, I'm putting up a picture of C. Wright Mills there. You know, you see that he was considered to be this sort of very cool sociologist. He would come, in this kind of attire, riding a bike, and he was also a sort of a in that sense, he was also very he was considered marginal, because at the point at that point of time, the way in which he was thinking of sociology was very different from his peers, and so he was he was, in that sense, he was considered radical. Can we move to the previous one, the slide? Yeah. So you see. So this is a kind of, do you see what's happening here? That you can see two kinds of images in both the pictures. I think it's harder. What do you see in the first one? Anybody?
I'm a child is probably sad.
What?
Child doing it another side.
And I don't hear you.
A side view of a girl.
So do you only see one thing, or you see two different things?
Ma'am, only one thing.
In the first one?
Ma'am, a child seeing on the other side.
A child? Yeah, with face turned, or a person, whatever. And what else? Nothing else. What about the second one?
Two things come.
Two faces. That's it?
And a pillar
Yeah.
kind of structure.
Yeah. Okay. So the thing is that, even in the first one, there is something else, but right now, even I'm only seeing one. So the idea is that you, whenever you look at any, whatever you look at, whether it's a picture, whether it's, whatever it is that you're observing, you as a person, the person who's observing it has a unique perspective. So there are, as sociologists, what we would say is there are multiple ways of seeing. And this is what complicates the picture of science for us. So when you see, this simple thing of the apple falling from the tree, right? You observe it, the apple falls, it falls down on the ground, and you're able to, and your theory or your theoretical idea or the general statement is based on this observation, right? Now, for the sociologists, what happens is that the same thing can be seen, felt, experienced, and understood very differently by different people. So, so then so what you observe so if I think of the family situation, I was giving you the example of like a dinner time in a family. What each of us, if we see that, what each of us will observe will be very different. What we record will be very different. The kind of, and it can be different based on who the kinds of persons we are. It can be different based on the kinds of questions that we are asking. So if I'm asking a question about if I'm interested in figuring out gender relations in the family, then I will observe certain kinds of things. If I'm interested in thinking about work and how work is structured within the family, then I will arrive at, I will see different sorts of things. So we need to think then about this question of a perspective and what the ways of seeing possibly are and what they are shaped or determined by. Vaibhav, you could move to the slides above, which begin with sociological imagination. Yeah. So C. Wright Mills, as I said, he was quite radical in many ways because of what he was, what he was trying to articulate. At a time when it was important to do theory and it was important to put forward certain sort of grand theoretical ideas. Here was C. Wright Mills, who was saying that the sociologists of his generation are too detached from society. They're too detached from their own context. They don't really care about their own context, and they're just making this kind of grand theory without thinking about their own context. And he said that, in fact, sociologists should be activists, that, in fact, they are far too removed from their context and what's happening in their own societies. And he felt that sociologists should be activists. And this is a sort of common kind of complaint about sociology as a discipline and about sociologists, because we say that we are not here to, we can't fix the world. Sociologists can't fix the world. They can just understand it. And I think over the years there has been a shift in this kind of positioning of the discipline. So fundamentally, what C. Wright Mills was saying is that as sociologists, we have to focus on two things and the connection between these two things. He articulated in terms of, I'm sorry, I think Vaibhav just, his call must have dropped. I'm sure he'll join back. But let's carry on with the class. So for him, he said that we have to think of this connection between history and biography, right? What is biography? What is your biography? It's your personal story, right? And it's your personal life. What is happening in your life? And now, what is happening in your life? It's similar to what I said about individual and collective, or agency and structure, that what is happening in your life is located within a particular context. So your biography is shaped by a larger history. Now, that history, you could say that history is, the history of your own family, the history of, let's say, the way in which the history of the nation, the history of your region. So that actually what we want to do as sociologists is to look at the immediacy of personal circumstance, but understand that that immediacy of personal circumstance has to be located in something larger. There is a larger vessel in which we have to put this. So for the other way that he articulated this is that there is a relationship between personal troubles and public issues. So, if I think of unemployment and divorce as personal, or suicide as a personal trouble, he's saying that we have to connect it to a larger public issue. So in fact, none of this is essentially individual and personal. They're all part of a larger public issue, right? So if any sort of contemporary idea, context, phenomenon you take up. If you think of it as, so if I say depression, right? And there's a lot of it in society during this pandemic phase. If I say depression, that depression now is not about it's not about an individual. It's not about an individual experiencing something. It's about the individual in a larger context, pandemic, at a certain point in history, and so on. So, um, so as a sociologist, we have to locate uh, um, what we see, what we observe, what is going on in society in terms of this relationship between history and biography, in terms of this relationship between personal troubles and larger population. That means that if I think of, if I think of poverty, I can say that poverty is not the doing of simply of individuals. So one can argue that, why do you think people are poor? And you can argue that people are poor because they don't work hard, and therefore and they're lazy and they don't make enough money. So there is a sort of vicious cycle that they get into. Whatever they earn, they don't save. They don't have so you can think about all of this as reasons for why people are poor. As a sociologist, what is important is to locate this in the larger context, right? So why is India an underdeveloped country, right? Why is India considered a developing nation as opposed to Europe and any of the European countries? And we know that we have to locate it in our colonial history, right? So it's we are not poor simply because we have a large population. That poverty or the underdevelopment or the tag of a developing nation is connected in some ways to our colonial history. It's also connected to who made these categories, and we know that these categories were not made by nations in the global south, right? These categories were made again in a certain context of the way in which global finance and global capital was supposed to be dispersed. So when you make, so that this idea of making connections between biography and history, they pertain to us as individuals, they pertain to us as any collective that you look at, whether it's family, whether it's a workplace, whether it's a firm. For any individual or group of people, you could make these connections between biography and history. You could also make it for, as I gave you the example then, for particular nations as well, for the state. So again, whether you look at poverty or whether you look at, if I say mental health, again, you could think of that as an intensely personal sort of trouble, but it has a larger connection to a public issue. Next slide, please. Is that clear? Do you have any questions? Okay. So then a sociological imagination then would mean that we look beyond the person. We look beyond the individual personality and try and identify its relationship to wider social structures, right? And again, going by that example of marriage, or that you look beyond how it is not just an individual decision, but it is tied to other social institutions. So it's tied to the family, it's tied to the kin network, it's tied to caste, it's tied to class, and for each one of us, it will be a different kind of combination of factors with regard to each of these institutions that helps us focus on, or that helps us understand this relationship between the personality and the wider social structure. So that's the first thing about sociological imagination, that we make this connection between the person and wider social structures. The second is that we have a sensitivity to history, to time, to temporality, that the time I may be studying something in the here and now, but what I look at in the here and now is not simply about the here and now. There is always an indication or an implication that you're located in a past, that you have a history that is being drawn into the present whenever you make any decision or observe any social phenomenon. So you have to have this sensitivity to history and a kind of imagination about the problems that are confronting society. So if I were to do a historical study of, let's say, poverty, I will come up with this kind of answer that, okay, people are poor because of these reasons. I observe poor people and I say these are the reasons that they are this way. And if I look at the history, then I may think about connecting it to questions of class, to questions of caste and marginalization, to the kind of opportunities that are available to people, and that will help me to think about what are the structural forces that have kept certain people poor and certain people not being able to access the opportunities that others are. So sociological imagination then is the quality of the mind and something that we can develop. And what Mills was trying to say then is that it's something that all of us have the capacity to develop. So it's a quality of the mind that will enable us to grasp this relationship between history and biography, that will enable us to see beyond the individual and the individual personality, to look at wider social structures and to make connections across societies, to make connections across the immediate temporality, the immediate time frame. So therefore, it's not something that is restricted to sort of professors and to people who are doing their PhDs, but it is something that all must attempt to do. So you see that in a sense, what C. Wright Mills was trying to say, that it's not just about the discipline. Sociological imagination is something that we must all try and cultivate. So that's why I feel it's quite powerful to begin an introductory class on sociology with this idea of sociological imagination, because especially for all of you, because you're not going to be sociologists, right? But it is something that your lives can gain by, your lives and the lives of those around you, and ultimately those wider social structures can actually be shaped by the kind of sociological imagination we apply in the way that we live our lives. So what it helps us to do then is to recognize the fraternal nature of human existence. The idea that you as an individual, you're not alone. You're not, you may think of yourself as having this kind of agency, etc. But there is a kind of connectedness that we have. We don't see that connectedness. Our common sense does not necessarily show us very easily what that connectedness is. But as a sociologist, you begin to conceive of this nature of human existence. You also recognize the idea of diversity, right? You also recognize this whole idea of perspectives and different ways of seeing, so that there can be different perspectives on the same problem or the same issue, that the way in which you would think of mental health for upper class people would be very different from the way in which you think of mental health for those who are struggling to get 2 square meals a day, right? So the way in which these people from these two contexts will approach the issue of mental health will be totally different. So so what the ordinary person will gain from a sociological imagination is an understanding of the effects of what is happening in our daily lives, and an ability to question what is going on rather than to just conform. So, and this is also the principle with which we begin to think about a sociological imagination. That actually what you're doing as sociologists is that you're questioning what you're seeing. You're reflecting on what is the obvious. And so, and once you start to do that, any sociologist, and the TAs will vouch for this here, that of course life becomes far more complicated, but it also becomes far more exciting. That you're actually able to think about why is something the way that it is, right? And it's deeply disturbing because you begin to question things that you've taken for granted all along. So that the family, what is happening in the family, how decisions are made, so all of that becomes something that is at the realm of reflection, and it opens up your world to sort of other kinds of decisions and other kinds of ways of looking at things. So next slide, please. Okay, no, next one. Yeah, okay. What was the previous one? Yeah, that's good. Yeah, this is done. So as I said that what Mills was actually responding to was the nature of sociological research, which he said is it's either sort of too much focused on administrative concerns rather than by intellectual concerns, or this kind of posturing in terms of a grand theory is what was shaping the discipline, right? That you had to sort of make these have these grand theories. And what he thought was that effective sociological thought is that which will apply this kind of imagination, this kind of sociological imagination. Yeah, and the next one. So what do we do to yeah. So what do we do to develop a sociological imagination? The first thing is that we have to make the familiar strange, or we have to question and critique the world that we see around us. So making the familiar strange, which means that in order to be able to move away from your common sense, you have to begin to think of the familiar as something that is strange, as something that is so you can't take it for granted. So if I think of and what enables that not taking for granted is a focus on history, because that things were not always as they were, and you begin to understand that you need to question what you're seeing, right? So the first sort of principle of trying to apply and develop a sociological imagination is to make the familiar strange, or to question and reflect on everything that we see. The idea behind this is that nothing is as it seems, right? So if I go back to ways of seeing, that same picture can be seen as two faces, facing each other, and you can see it also as a pillar or something like that, right? So the same picture could be seen in two different ways, and it when we think about developing a sociological imagination, this is what we want to do. We want to question what we see. We know that what we see is not necessarily what is, right? What we hear is also not necessarily what is. So so if I, again, to go back to the question of marriage, as I said, most of us will marry within our within our circles, right? You say that, or if you think about this statement, something like, the world is small, right? When you encounter people, it's a small world, you say, because you find so many connections to some of the people that that they're okay. Either you went to the same school, or people who went to some school. So you think that when we say that the world is small, what we are doing is we are looking at our own connections. We are not questioning. If we question that, then that it's small because you've only engaged in a very particular kind of world, right? You haven't gone beyond. The idea is that you haven't really gone beyond your own context and your own setting, and that's why it appears small to you. It's small because you have only engaged in a particular kind of caste, class, social background sort of network, right? It's about your network. So I think so. So I may say that the world is small, but when I begin to question it, what I could possibly see, is that people only engaging in their own sort of immediate location, and by location I mean caste, class, background sort of location, right? So if I question it and if I critique it, then this is something that is revealed to me. So otherwise, I think we can take for granted that the statement that the world is rather small. So what we want to do is that we develop a sociological imagination by questioning and critiquing the world around us. We develop it also by having the capacity to shift from one perspective, one aspect, accepted perspective, to another. So we have to have the ability to make that shift, to say that, okay, possibly I was wrong. When I encounter something new, when I encounter another way of looking at this world, another way of understanding a social phenomenon, I have to have the openness to think differently, to embrace this other perspective. And then finally, you can begin to think about the impersonal aspects and the connection between the impersonal aspects to the most sort of intimate and personal aspects of people's lives. So things that are apparently can no way be connected, you try and see if there is a possibility of connection between those. So if I think, the one of the sort of slightly problematic, probably the example of, when you think of family, you think of the family as a space of love, right? Now, if I were to think radically, can I think of the family as a space for exercising power, not simply for exercising love, but as a space for exercising power? So now that's a huge shift in perspective, right? Now, what sociology does and what the sociological imagination is telling us to do is to embrace these sorts of very different ideas of the family. So we may have grown up thinking of the family as a space of love, but can we begin to see it as a space for the exercise of power? Okay. Yeah. Now, what we have in, just to point to what we have in this slide. Sorry, don't go ahead. Is that we have to, when behind all this and connected to all this is the idea of reason and logic, so that you're actually, when we say that what are we doing in the social sciences, what Mills was trying to say, that we need to not bureaucratize reason. And bureaucratizing reason really for him would mean that you see it in a particular way, right? That there is only one way to think of how reason is to be conceived. What he was saying is that when you bring reason to bear on human affairs, when you're looking at human affairs and you're trying to understand the place of reason, you know that there are different sorts of perspectives which will emerge. And so the promise in the social sciences really lies in being able to uncover these different perspectives. Okay, I can take about 5 minutes. We don't have much time, but let's take 5 minutes for questions. Do you have any questions? Is this clear? What we should do at the start of every class possibly is to think about, have the names of volunteers who are going to do the notes. So do we have any volunteers for today? For class notes?
Ma'am, can you just explain explicitly what exactly we need to do in the class notes? Whatever things that you had taught, just we have to write in the.
So I will share this PPT with you in any case. But I mean, if today you're not prepared, then it's okay. But if you've taken notes to just, I mean, if you listen in class and you just take class notes, simply uploading that is fine.
Ma'am, I can
Yes.
upload notes today.
Okay.
I can also upload.
Can you
notes
just,
today.
3 people can write their names on the chat so we can.
Till 9 we have to upload, right? The notes.
Till
9 p.m. we have to upload.
Yeah,
just after
9
class.
p.m. today. Just 3 people is fine. So let's not. So let's take Ashrut, Vansh, and Kunal, and Tanmay, Aarti, Himanshu, and Shruti for next class. Is that okay?
Okay.
Yes.
Shainal and Vaibhav, will you take this down?
Yes, ma'am.
Ashrut, Vansh, and Kunal for this class, and Tanmay, Aarti, Himanshu, and Shruti for next. Okay, great. Okay, so there was a question. What was it? I'm sorry. Class notes. That I explained. Any other questions? Go ahead, Himanshu.
No, ma'am, I don't have any. I just sorted out.
Ma'am, just confirming, with bureaucratization of reason, you mean that we are looking at something with just one perspective?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
so now this is also something that we need to think about a little bit more. When you think of reason, right?
Yes.
You think of reason as one kind of reason, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So logic, can there be logic is one logic. So when I was making this distinction between how we think of the idea of the scientific in the social sciences and sociology, it can be problematized through these sorts of points that we are raising, so that to bring reason to bear on human affairs, and this is C. Wright Mills's words, is that when if I bring my reason, right, and I look at poverty, and I can then easily say that, okay, laziness laziness creates conditions of poverty, right? Inability to save, spending everything that you earn creates conditions of poverty. Yeah. Now there is a certain reasoning involved in. I have observed something, and then I'm saying, okay, because of this, there is poverty. Now, but there can be other perspectives. There can be other ways of reasoning. So when you ask a poor person, the poor person may tell you that I despite working 12 to 12, 15 hours a day, I'm not able to make enough for myself and my family. Now, what is that about, right? So you need I think what C. Wright Mills was trying to say, that the first explanation was a kind of bureaucratization of reason. And again, I'm putting this very simply for in order for you to understand. But what you're doing is sort of literally trying to make certain cause-effect relationships. Whereas to have a sociological imagination would mean to look at a problem in terms of these multiple perspectives. And when you introduce these multiple perspectives, you see that that kind of reasoning actually fails. And that to bear reason, what kind of reason will I bear? The kind of reason that enables me to think of the connection between individual and society. Think of the connection between biography and history. If I don't make that connection between biography and history, I have something that is ahistorical. I have something that is can be completely uncontextualized, right? That it's just something that applies universally, and that sometimes is a problem. So we are in sociology, we face this tussle between trying to sort of arrive at certain grand universal statements that, okay, this is true of all human societies, and focusing on the local, the immediate context, which can often be, which can often defy these, what we would consider certain universal norms.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, so it's almost time, and
Ma'am,
yeah,
I had
Hello, ma'am. Am I
go
audible?
ahead.
ma'am, I had one query about the roster that would you be circulating. So when it would be circulated, and also when we are making our notes, so do we have to get it approved by TA or you before uploading, or we just have to
No,
upload it
just
directly?
just upload.
To,
You can just upload. I will by today I should have that.
and also.
I will set that up on Moodle. You will have to upload on Moodle.
Okay. And secondly, about the roster when it would be circulated, where we can write our names, that when we
We'll
have
do
to
it in every class.
take down and.
We will do that at the end of every class.
Okay.
Or at the beginning of every class, I think. So
Okay.
yeah,
So we
Shaila,
have to upload our notes only once in
only
entire semester, or we
only
will be doing it
you can
frequently.
upload it more than
Okay.
once if you wish, but at least once. So the 5 marks will be for uploading it at least once, because we have 14 weeks, and that means we have 2 classes a week, right? And we have 85 students.
Yes.
So only once is good. If three people are doing it every, or volunteer to do it every day.
Ma'am, I have a doubt.
Okay,
So
ma'am.
the
Thank
same
you.
people
Thank
won't
you.
be repeated twice.
Huh?
The people who are taking notes today won't be taking tomorrow or the day after that. Right?
No. So once if you're taking it today, you're done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ma'am, I just wanted to add this. There was this illusion, right? Can you please go to that page?
I can't hear you, Kunal. Can you be a little louder?
Yes, ma'am. There was an illusion we couldn't figure out. No.
Yeah, can you go back
That
to
is.
Yeah, sure. Vaibhav, could you go back to the slide with the images?
Ma'am, yes. The first illusion is called My Wife and My Mother-in-Law. There is also a survey conducted regarding the age groups, which age bracket sees the old woman looking towards the left or the young lady. So I thought I would just make a note of it so that we could read it.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't see the old lady at all.
You can, ma'am. Actually, you have to the ear of the young lady make it as the eye of the old lady, and the chin of the young lady as the nose of the old lady. You could see that.
Hmm. No, this is see, that's why I'm saying that when I first some years ago when I first looked at this picture, I did see the two images, but now I can't. So even
Yeah,
as
actually, I was noting that because there is a survey conducted regarding the age and the perspective, so I thought that would be great to read.
yeah, okay. So can
And
you
the
share?
right side one, I
Why don't
think
you?
I'll search it and I'll share it. Now, right side one is called the Rubens Ways, by the way.
Okay, so you can maybe share it on the chat or whatever on the, I think on Teams you can share it.
If I get it, then I'll share it.
Yeah, okay. Also from Monday we will begin with the tutorials. So by today's Thursday, by tomorrow I'll share the videos that you need to watch for the tutorials. But one thing that I've already suggested you watch is on the slide there is this link to an interview of Andre Bethes, which talks about this relationship between sociology and common sense. So I want you to watch that, but I will also share another video that I want you to watch, and we'll be discussing that in Monday's tute. So please come to the tute having seen that video. It'll be about half an hour or so. And come as per your groups. If you're not able to come with your group, then I request you to write me an email just clarifying which is the preferred time, which group you are in and which is a preferred time for you.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Sure.
Ma'am, actually, the timings of the tutorials is coinciding with others also. The other professors were also having the problem related to that. Like the tutorial on Thursday from 1 to 2 is clashing with the timings of tutorial of APL 108. That's the same timing 1 to 2. These kind of problem is there in almost all the tutorials which we will be having for this course as well.
But are you not able to join with another group then?
I think tutorials, we will be having group wise tutorials for, like, we will be having only one tutorial a week in this. Okay.
Only one a week. So if you're not able to join on Thursday, you let me know and you join on another day. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, 4 days are there. So if you have problems on a particular day, you are expected to join on another day, but write to me in advance so that I know that you're in group whatever 1, 2, or 3, and you're joining with group 1, something like that.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, so I will end the class and just keep a lookout for the video and other material that I will share. And I will, Weber, will you, I have to enable you guys to do the Moodle. So all of this will be on the Moodle backpack, because I think, I don't know, is it okay for all of you to access Teams, or is Moodle better?
My Moodle is better.
Yeah. So I think Moodle, we will put all of this on Moodle. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
See you on Monday.
Question, ma'am. I just wanted to ask from where can we have a look on which day we have our tubes, like according to group wise?
It's there in the slotting pattern. Have you seen the slotting pattern?
I'm sorry, I'm just
Is that Vaishnavi?
Yes, ma'am.
Wait 1 second. I think somebody has their mic on. Yeah, okay. Vaishnavi, you can see this in the slotting pattern. There is the timetable is written over there. So I don't know whether you've seen it. So if you check on that, you'll see on the A slot tutes are on Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. Maybe Vaibhav can share that document as well.
Sure, ma'am.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Rahul has shared it in the chat. All right. So I'll see you on Monday. Thank you.